An IDF strike left 3 dead at Gaza's only Catholic church, while Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office put out a statement saying, quote, Israel deeply regrets that a stray ammunition hit Gaza's Holy Family Church. Every innocent life lost is a tragedy. We share the grief of the families and the faithful. Well, Palestinian pastor Steven Khoury joins us now. So, my friend, how are you processing this piece of news?
It breaks our heart, like any human being would. I received messages from some of our Jewish friends who are heartbroken by what happened, Raj. And it's only natural to feel frustration, sometimes anger, sometimes remorse, sometimes you sympathize with the people in Gaza, the innocent people, specifically the Christian community who are literally in a church, praying on their knees to that day that the war ends.
So according to the Vatican, Prime Minister Netanyahu even called the Pope. Obviously, this is getting a lot of attention. And I think maybe you're in such an interesting perspective or interesting situation, and your perspective is fascinating because, again, you are a Palestinian pastor. You grew up in the Palestinian territories. You pastor in the Palestinian territories as well as Jerusalem. And I know this is a loaded question, but is there a line? Where is the line between criticizing moves of the Israeli government and going too far? Is there a line? Where is that line?
That's a great question, brother. I'll just tell you some of the thoughts that I've been processing, praying for over the years. To those that love Israel, Raj, most will try to think of ways. And now there's two ways to approach this. To those that love Israel, they will always be thinking of ways to defend what happened. And those that hate Israel will come up with reasons why Israel needs to be taught a lesson, need to be held responsible, the international court, and on and on and on. So you're always going to have the extreme ends and so forth. But for those that love truth, who are chasing after God's righteousness, after real, genuine truth and real hope, real change, real healing, will have a different view and an angle to it. Does that make sense, Raj? So you have two.
Perfect.
You have two bases. Those that love Israel to no end, they're going to come up with excuses or reasons, excuses, reasons, justifications, or an explanation. Then those that hate Israel, they're going to give their own narrative and why the extreme end of wiping out the IDF completely. But then you have the middle voices, those voices which I love to be part of. And here's what they say: it's I do not believe, now personally, I do not believe Israel would intentionally hit a church. I know this for a fact. If this was done in fact, well, I don't know about fact. Well, I've been ministering there was born there, grew up there all my life, been ministering there for 30 plus years. We do a lot of paperwork with the Israeli government for Christian families, for conferences, for permits, for events. You get the point. So I do not believe Israel would intentionally hit a church. If this was done intentionally, if I want to emphasize for all the trolls out there, if it would have been a personal decision from someone that is sitting behind the trigger or the button, dealing with a hatred, animosity, revenge, anger. He or she must be held responsible. I'll say that again. If this was done intentionally by somebody that's facing bitterness and hatred, Raj, they must be held responsible, and so must those that are above them. Someone has to be held responsible, and a message must come out directed from the Christian community in Gaza that they are not the enemy. So basically, Israel needs to send a message into Gaza immediately, into the Christians in Gaza, Christians into the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, that Christians, Arabs are not the enemy. Arab Muslims are not the enemy. It's the fanatical extremism within the Arab culture. That's the enemy. That's the mentality. And that's what I believe strongly. But somebody has to be held responsible for what happened.
Okay, so, I think for a lot of people, you and I have been there so many times that dealing in the gray areas actually isn't that complicated or difficult when you actually are over there. I mean, I always go back to this point. If you want someone to criticize Israel, just talk to Israelis. It's like the idea of criticizing Israel or disagreeing with the movement of the government or not being thrilled with this law or that law, like, that's what Israelis do. I have no problem. I don't think Israelis have any problem
No.
with you saying that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong, and that was wrong. But I will say this conversely. As a student of the Holocaust, I am overwhelmed by the anti-Semitism I see in the world today. And again, I don't say this lightly, but as a student of the Holocaust, I see things that I thought I would never see again, especially in the quote unquote Christian United States. I have a friend who survived Auschwitz. He passed away recently, but he would always talk about the road signs along the way to Auschwitz. How it didn't start with gas chambers and crematorium. It started with the dehumanizing, the othering, the boycotting, and it's like that's all happening to the Jewish people. So there's a dichotomy here, which is totally okay. Which is, hey, that was wrong. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu said as much that was wrong, but then this slithery way of being anti-Semitic by calling them the Zionist entity. It's just like, oh, guys, that to me is something that's not biblical. And I know this is such a huge subject, and there's so much pain and so much loss and so much anger and so much frustration that you live in 24/7. God bless you and your wife, man, because I can't imagine the burden you guys must carry. But maybe in closing, my friend, biblically, you are a pastor, right? And obviously, I have a heart for Israel. I think God's up to something. Biblically, how do we make sense? How do we enter into this sphere to where we're not disparaging, we're not, overt racism, but we're bringing Yeshua into this really toxic situation?
It's a great question, brother. I do want to remind those that are watching that there's a lot of hurting on the Jewish side, and there's a lot of hurting on the Arab side. We cannot take that away. There's hurting. And by the way, I want to add something, Raj, before we answer that last beautiful question you asked is, if there was Hamas terrorists and Hamas regime, any kind of Hamas militia in and around the church area, they need to be held accountable and responsible by the people of Gaza and the people in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, the Muslims around the world. If Hamas were anywhere near the vicinity of the church, and if it goes back to that was a target area, then Hamas is to be held responsible for using anything that is dealing with civilians, hospitals, schools, churches, and so forth. And to answer your question, how do we move on? And well, we turn to Jeremiah 29:11, where God speaks of the plan to prosper, to bless the people, his people, the people that are turned to him, people that are turned after his righteousness. I turn to Psalm 31:24. It says, "Be strong and take heart, all your hope is in the Lord." I turn to Romans 8:28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, those who have been called according to his purpose, and then to his glory and to his riches. And that's how I encourage our believers. So again, loving Israel does not mean you're anti-Arab. Loving the Arabs does not mean you're anti-Israel. We can be biblically sound and have the boldness and courage to call good, good, evil, evil. And we cannot be afraid and must not be afraid to blur the line, Raj. We have to. And look, here's what I say. They are not going anywhere. I tell this to all my Arab and my Jewish friends. And you know me, I have friends on both sides. I've stayed in Jewish homes. I've stayed in Arab homes. And I get a lot of messages with what happened with the church attack from Muslims and Jews. Look, they are not going. I tell the Arabs, Jews are not going anywhere. I tell the Jews, Arabs are not going anywhere, whether you like it or not. They're not going anywhere, regardless of what some on both sides who are more on the right extreme, the few on both sides, who they desire a dream of a country without the other. It's not going to happen. Both have to rise above the hatred, animosity, revenge. It's time for healing. It's time for overcoming. It's time to look ahead and learn from the past. But I'm calling on the Arabs who are moderate, who are peaceful, to start to rise up and to speak out against the violence and killing and animosity. And I call on my Jewish friends who are religious in nature, are Orthodox, or are Jewish, to rise up and to also begin to look ahead, learning from the past, but look ahead. We can't let the few destroy the canvas of our heart and the canvas of who God created us to be.
Stephen, I am so glad that you exist, my brother. You are such an important voice in this discussion. And again, even just reporting this, I can imagine the comments are going to go crazy. That's your life. You live in this. So I just pray supernatural strength, clarity, wisdom, and more than anything, shalom. Just peace for you and your family. Steven Khoury, my brother, thank you so much.
Shalom, my brother. Blessings and salam to everybody.